Greetings. How are you today, and from which city are you watching us? In today's video, we will explore forbidden knowledge and the method of Thoth as a metaphor for activating creative consciousness through symbols, sound, and intention. What if the ancient method veiled in the myths of Thoth is not magic, but a language for tuning consciousness? It is closed to those who chase quick miracles. True knowing asks for discipline, stillness, and responsibility. Catch the pause from which the first syllable is born and allow the story to open now. In ancient manuscripts preserved within temple depths, the name of Thoth was joined with the science of the gods. These texts did not speak of people, but of the very principles of consciousness, as if describing a map that revealed invisible dimensions of mind. The scrolls were adorned with symbols, and each sign seemed like a door leading to new understanding. They were not random drawings, nor depictions of deities, but diagrams of inner work, where every line signified the movement of thought. Those who attempted to decipher the signs realized they were not made to describe the outer world. They pointed inward, to processes within. At the heart of their meaning resounded the idea of a code woven into the very fabric of being. This code did not resemble familiar nucleotide chains or chemical formulas. It offered another view. Each cell holds a program of meaning. This program did not describe the body, but reflected an order of thought. It was like a quiet pattern inscribed in breath, as though life itself contained a message unseen by the eyes, but heard in the depth of silence. People who touched these scrolls remarked, the text seemed to breathe with them, alive in the moment of reading. Gradually, it became clear. The method of Thoth was neither technique nor ritual. It was a way of seeing through which hidden order revealed itself. When symbols were arranged in sequences, they became mirrors for inner vision. Where ordinary reason saw lines and marks, the attentive gaze sensed the breath of meaning. Hidden knowledge is always surrounded by a veil. It exists so that a person does not rush, but learns endurance and humility. So the scrolls of Thoth were not given at once. They unfolded only to those ready to listen to the silence between words. For within that silence lies the very key to perception. When the temple veil was slightly lifted, one understood. The mystery was not within the walls, but within oneself. The symbols were merely reflections of one's own depth. Then the code within each cell began to resonate like music, reminding of the order to which all things aspire. Thus arose the realization: knowledge is not simply read, it is lived. The word ceases to be a set of letters. It becomes a force that directs attention, and the deeper one entered this language, the clearer it became. The veil of the temple is not a barrier, but the beginning of the path. Among the lines of the scrolls, where the patterns seemed chaotic, a careful gaze noticed a hidden regularity. The rows of signs formed not only words, but rhythms. Each symbol seemed to hold its own length and pause, like notes in a melody, where silence was as meaningful as sound. Within this order lay a suggestion. Consciousness could be tuned not through explanation, but through rhythm. Sound became the first doorway. It did not demand belief. It demanded attention. A tone spoken with inner focus altered the state of perception. The word ceased to be only a means of transmitting information and turned into a tool of alignment. Like a tuning fork restoring a string to its pure resonance, sound arranged attention into a precise order. Number continued what sound had begun. It was not confined to counting objects, but unfolded as the expression of proportion. Each number carried balance, an architecture of thought. Simple sequences, 1, 2, 3, contained the rhythm of arising, development, and completeness. Number here meant not quantity, but direction. It gathered scattered mind and anchored it to a steady base. Thus arose the supposition that sound and number formed a hidden grammar for the mind. This grammar was not written in letters and rules. It resonated within us. When a syllable aligned with a certain proportion, attention felt clarity, as if finding its rightful place. In the ancient schools, this was called frequency grammar, the art of attuning word, breath, and inner rhythm. The secret of this grammar was simple, yet unreachable to the casual gaze. It taught that the mind becomes clear when it resonates rightly. A word spoken without inner harmony lost its force, but the same word infused with rhythm and number awakened energy strong enough to alter perception. Notice how in daily speech we unconsciously follow this principle. Some phrases sound dry and vanish. Others linger long in memory. The difference is not in the words, but in how they resonate. That resonance itself is the sign of frequency grammar. This is why the method of Thoth was regarded not as magic, but as a discipline of inner hearing. It offered not new incantations, but a way of listening more deeply. Where the outer ear caught only sound, the inner hearing sensed proportion and rhythm. And in that moment, consciousness entered a new order. In ancient schools, knowledge was never placed on display. It was concealed beneath layers of ritual, guarded by symbols, and preserved in silence. Those who approached the method of Thoth understood. The mystery had to remain hidden, otherwise it lost its force. The guardians inscribed texts so that each level of meaning revealed itself only after inner growth. On the surface were simple stories and legends, but deeper within lay instructions for consciousness. Symbols were crafted with many layers. A single image could be read in 3 or even 4 ways. To the curious, it was only decoration. To the prepared student, it became a map of the inner path. Each sign resembled a door, and only one who lingered before it in silence could see it open. Thus, the casual gaze was filtered away, while the serious seeker gained passage. Mantras and formulas were whispered. They were not written openly, lest they be spoken thoughtlessly. Before hearing even a simple sequence of sounds, one underwent trials. A student was tested for humility, endurance, and readiness. Only then did the teacher share the first vibration, as if handing over a key that unlocked depth. Revelation was valued not for secrecy itself, but for the practice it led toward. The mystery became an instrument. It taught focus and attention. One could not merely utter a word expecting a miracle. One had to live the word, attuned to its inner strength. Only then did it come alive. Notice how similar this is to life itself. Knowledge obtained without effort remains superficial, but that which is endured becomes part of one's character. So it was with the method of Thoth. It did not yield to idle vision. It embedded itself through trial. Each symbol tested the sincerity of the seeker. Traditions preserved this principle for centuries. In some cultures, it was a vow of silence. In others, years of apprenticeship. Yet, the essence remained the same. To preserve was to respect the force of knowledge, and only one who had found patience could open within themselves the source that was always present. Secret keeping was not prohibition, but care. It guarded the inner garden so that true fruits might grow there. Those who walked this path realized the treasure was not hidden in books. It had always lived within, awaiting the moment when consciousness was ready to hear it. When the first symbols were arranged into rhythm and number, a question arose. How was this force to be directed? The answer lay in a sequence, simple yet strict, like the framework holding a building. First, silence. Then, rhythm. After, image. And finally, the word. This chain was not a technique but a natural order, reflecting the very structure of consciousness. Silence always came first. It gathered the scattered motions of the mind, as the night sky gathers stars into one expanse. In this pause, familiar noises disappeared, and inner sight began to discern what had once been hidden. Silence was not emptiness. It felt like fullness from which all could emerge. Rhythm followed as the next step. It aligned breath and inner tempo. Just as footsteps on a path create a steady pattern, rhythm restored to consciousness a sense of grounding. It prevented thoughts from scattering, holding them in a single flow. Simple repetition of sound or breath became a bridge between awareness and body. Then came the image. Not a random picture nor fantasy, but a deliberately called form that gathered thought in a certain direction. The image acted as a vector. It set meaning and allowed the inner current to take shape. Like an architect sketching the lines of a future building, the image outlined what was to be manifested. When all these elements converged, the word appeared. It was not the beginning, but the culmination. Within the word lived silence, rhythm, and image, and thus it became not merely a sound, but the expression of intention. The word here meant action. It initiated the inner process into the world. This was the geometry of intention. It taught that every act begins from silence, is aligned by rhythm, guided by image, and sealed with word. Thus, the method of Thoth shifted from mystery to practice. It demanded no external ornament, only attentive presence. If one listens closely, one sees this order is familiar. Thought arises in stillness, is shaped in breath, takes form in imagination, and only then finds voice. The difference was that the ancients taught how to make this process conscious. And therein lay the action of the method. It returned a person to the source of power always near. The geometry of intention showed that inner silence was not an end, but a beginning. From it emerged order, and with order, the capacity to create meaningfully. When the thought of the geometry of intention became clear, a natural question followed. Did this knowledge belong to a single source? It became evident that similar principles appeared in many traditions, as if humanity heard the same rhythm, but expressed it through different images. Kabbalistic diagrams, for example, described the soul's path through the spheres of the Sephirot. Each movement of thought was tied to a number and a name. Each line signified transition from one state to another. These diagrams resembled ancient maps of inner space, moving from roots to crown, from earth to light. In Indian traditions, the same idea emerged through mandalas and yantras. Their patterns were not decorations, but maps of contemplation. Each form indicated how the mind should gather and move toward the center. The Vedic hymns spoke of the breath of syllable, of each sound carrying the power of cosmic order. Thus, breath and word became a path of union with the source of life itself. In Gnostic teachings appeared the notion of memory of light. They spoke of the soul bearing a radiance lost in the world of forms, and the task of practice was to restore that light, weaving it into a single pattern. Again, the theme appeared. Meaning holds attention, and attention restores force. Despite different cultures, languages, and symbols, the same melody resounded beneath. Order of thought and rhythm of word created the bridge toward depth. Traditions spoke across centuries, confirming a unified methodology. This did not mean all knowledge was identical. Rather, each culture added its shade, its emphasis, its explanation. Yet behind the diversity of forms, a shared structure emerged. And here lay true resonance. When different paths converged on one center, the practice of mindfulness and responsibility. This resonance revealed that the method of Thoth was no exception, nor an isolated invention. It was part of humanity's great memory of how consciousness can be awakened and guided. And this memory appeared again and again, in symbols, in breath, in rhythm. In this recognition, the boundary between ancient and modern dissolved. Everything became one flow, where cultures were like the two banks of a single river. And if one listened carefully, one could sense the river always flowed toward the source, reminding that knowledge belongs not to time, but to being itself. Today, when people speak of divine DNA, it is often framed as a sensation. But in esoteric tradition, the phrase meant something else, a metaphor of the inner source capable of altering perception of reality. This idea unexpectedly resonates with modern science, where researchers study the brain's plasticity and the environment's influence on biological processes. Neuroplasticity shows that the brain is not a rigid construct. Each experience leaves traces, reshapes connections, and strengthens new pathways. Where once it was believed structure was fixed, it is now known to be alive and pliable. Like the symbols of ancient scrolls, each new impulse shapes the order of attention and the direction of thought. Epigenetics adds another layer. The genetic code, once thought immutable, now appears as a script where much depends on which lines are activated. Nutrition, breath, thoughts, even emotional states can switch programs on or off. This strikingly echoes the ancient teaching of a code of meaning within every cell. From this emerges an important conclusion. Practice becomes the ecology of consciousness. If words, images, and intentions are not random bursts but regular order, they begin to influence how potential is expressed. A person ceases to be a captive of habits and becomes the gardener of their inner field. Consider how this brings us closer to understanding the method of Thoth. It spoke of symbols and rhythms as a way to rewrite the inner fabric of perception. Modern science confirms brain and body do respond to rhythm, sound, attention, and thought. What once was called mysticism increasingly looks like subtle work with living systems. This is the turning point. Knowledge no longer belongs only to antiquity. It breathes in the present, validated by research and practice. When one chooses words carefully, shapes images responsibly, and holds intention in rhythm, one effectively changes the expression of their own code. Modern resonances show there is no divide between esotericism and science. There are only different languages for the same process. One speaks of symbols and rituals, the other of neurons and genes. Yet both point in the same direction. The order of thought creates a new way of being in the world. And so it becomes clear. Divine DNA is not a formula in the laboratory. It is the inner knowing that every act can arise from conscious silence, from rhythm, and from clear intention. And here lies the true power of transformation. On any path of practice comes the moment when light meets shadow. Deepening perception not only expands clarity, but sharpens illusion. What once hid behind habits and masks now emerges, as though the mirror begins to show not only the face, but the depth beneath it. Pride often takes the shape of insight. When attention first feels the power of rhythm and image, a sense of chosenness arises. Yet this is the trap. True knowledge does not exalt above others. It humbles. It reminds that the force of word does not belong to the person. It belongs to the order that flows through all. Desire also wears disguises. It dresses as purpose and convinces that striving for power or recognition is a spiritual path. But the method of Thoth warned, any energy without ethics becomes distortion. If the image is filled with pride, it does not create, it destroys. Thus each symbol was tested not only by attention, but by intention. One had to ask, what drives my word? For what do I call forth the image? What will the action I send into the world become? These questions required no outward answer. They required honesty before oneself. In the ancient schools, this was called the trial of shadow. It was not punishment, but an inevitable stage of growth. At first, attention marveled at the new strength, then faced its reverse side. Only by passing through this encounter, could one gain stability. The trial of shadow showed that consciousness was not only light, it was a space where clarity and deception coexisted. And the method of Thoth taught not to avoid the shadow, but to look into it calmly. The shadow became teacher, reminding that every step requires humility and responsibility. Notice how this principle applies to modern life. Each time we discover a new level of strength, whether knowledge, talent, or opportunity, there comes temptation to use it for ego. But it is at this very moment that it is decided whether power becomes a source of growth or destruction. This was the true meaning of the trial, not to stop, but to purify. So that word might become creative, it had to pass through the filter of honesty. So that image might hold power, it had to be tested by humility. Then energy ceased to be dangerous and became a luminous tool. When the trial of shadow was passed, a new level of perception opened. One began to notice that consciousness could hold not only single thoughts, but entire patterns of meaning. This was called the threshold of memory. It had nothing to do with recalling facts. It was the ability to gather scattered impressions into a clear form that began to live with its own power. The code spoken of in the ancient scrolls was understood in this way, as the capacity to hold a higher form of thought. Just as architecture stands on proportion and line, so too could consciousness hold inner structure when aligned with order. This memory code was not written with ink. It remained in the stillness of mind and revealed itself through the quality of attention. Here, memory became more than a storehouse of events. It acted as fabric into which experience was woven. Each event, encounter, and word lived with awareness, left a mark, and these marks gathered into a pattern that began to guide life. Thus meaning ceased to be abstract. It became energy shaping action. This was considered the true unveiling of the mystery. One who entered the threshold of memory began to see life not as random episodes, but as a connected design. Inner attention joined fragments and turned chaos into order, and within this order appeared freedom, not to follow habit, but to create a new path. Notice that there is nothing supernatural here. We all know how memory joins scattered moments. But the method of Thoth taught, if a higher thought is held long enough, it begins to form reality. Meaning, sustained by attention, turns into a force that leads further. The threshold of memory was as much a trial as the encounter with shadow. It tested the ability not just to see and to cleanse, but to hold. For attention tends to scatter, and images quickly fade. Only persistence and inner discipline allowed one to weave the pattern from which order was born. Then it became clear. Creation does not begin with outer actions. It begins with memory that holds form until it becomes reality. And in this lay the true method, to gather inner silence, shape it into pattern, and let that pattern become a living source of energy. When attention learned to hold the patterns of memory, there came the moment when everything gathered into a single whole. This stage was called the Cathedral of Silence. It had no walls, columns, or altar. Its architecture was built within, where silence, rhythm, image, and word united in one sequence. First, silence. It returned the mind to the source from which all movements arose. This silence was not emptiness, but fullness, where noise and worry dissolved. In it, the root of breath could be heard. Silence became the foundation on which everything else was built. Then, rhythm. It entered this silence like a heart giving life to the body. Each breath became a beat, each sound a step into depth. Rhythm prevented attention from scattering. It gathered it into ordered flow. Like the tolling of a bell, rhythm established an invisible axis around which perception revolved. After came image. It appeared in consciousness not as fantasy, but as symbol, holding direction. The image was a vector, guiding inner energy. It linked the depth of silence with the form of thought, making the unseen tangible. At this moment, one felt that thought could gain flesh if held within rhythm and silence. And finally, word. It appeared not by chance, not in haste. Word became culmination, not mere sound, but a force uniting all elements. When spoken within this order, the word ceased to be common speech. It became the expression of whole intention, a resonance shifting perception and space itself. The Cathedral of Silence taught that practice was not escape from the world, but the gathering of it in new quality. When silence, rhythm, image, and word came together, attention felt a force, quiet and clear. This force needed no proof. It simply was. It reminded that the inner pattern was not abstraction, but living energy, accessible to all who learned to hold it. At this culmination, one realized the method of Thoth was not trick or esoteric display. It was a way of building an inner cathedral where everything was ordered and meaningful. And within this cathedral, the true act was not outward but inward. Attention became source, and word the bridge between inner and outer. When the Cathedral of Silence was complete, the time of return came. One understood that practice could not remain a private ritual. It had to become the breath of everyday life, or else knowledge would lose its living force. Here the method of Thoth reached its fullness. It rooted itself in simple gestures and ordinary words. Words were now chosen carefully. Each spoken word felt like a seed falling into soil, destined to sprout. If born from silence, it brought clarity and peace. If uttered from unawareness, it spread chaos. Practice taught that speech was not habit, but instrument, on which both inner and outer order depended. Images also grew responsible. One no longer allowed random visions of fear or envy. Images became beacons, signs pointing the way forward. Even the simplest pictures, a house, a road, a tree, carried force when born of clear intention. Thoughts ceased to dominate and began to serve. Where once the mind dictated its restless laws, now it became a faithful guide. Thought was used for creation, for harmony, for connection with the world. And here lay the great transformation. The mind ceased to be master and became ally. Return to the world meant that the method of Thoth was no longer separate from life. It required no temple or special condition. The temple became daily existence itself. Conversation with a friend, step along the street, breath before sleep. All could be infused with silence, rhythm, image, and word, if attention remained clear. In this return, a new vision was born. The world ceased to be an arena of accidents and became a reflection of inner source. What once seemed chaos now showed itself as a mirror, revealing inner order. And one saw, by changing the source, one changed the reflection. Thus knowledge ceased to be mystery and became life. It expressed itself not in rare practices or rituals, but in how we speak, think, and act each day. And then it became clear. The method of Thoth was not an ancient myth or esoteric game. It was an invitation to live consciously, in the rhythm of silence and the ethics of intention. The story of the method of Thoth ends where real life begins. All mysteries, symbols, and rituals lead to a simple discovery. The source of power was never outside. It always lived within, in breath, in word, in clarity of intention. Ancient temples were only reflections of the inner space each can build. The method of Thoth does not call for escape from the world. It returns us to daily life with a new vision, where every word is a seed, every thought an act, every image a direction. It is not legend or fancy, but a way of living consciously, seeing order in chaos, and creating harmony where unrest once was. Thus knowledge ceases to be forbidden and becomes natural. It is revealed not in rare revelations, but in how we see, listen, think, and speak every day. And then the ancient method lives again in the present, as a language uniting inner and outer, light and shadow, silence and word. Dear listeners, thank you for being part of this journey, for hearing not only the words, but the silence between them, for your attention and readiness to go deeper. These stories exist only because of you, those willing to listen and make them lived experience. May this story be not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of your own search for silence, rhythm, image, and word in everyday life.